Welcome back. Today we're going to look at the Festool TS55, the blades that come with it and which blade you should choose for your job. That sounds interesting. Stick around. I've had my TS55 for a fair few months now, and it gets used on most projects most days here in the shop and also on customer sites, and overall it's been a really cracking purchase and a cracking tool, but I'm conscious we've never really had a look at it, so today we're going to fix that. It comes in this rather fetching Sustainer 4, and opening the box we get the usual Festool power cord with a quick connection. We get the all-inclusive warranty including the theft protection, the usual Festool manual. We get the plunge saw itself, TS55, and that includes a 5mm Allen key for changing the blade that lives happily inside the handle. And in the base we get a knob and a splinter guard for when we're doing cuts, and we'll look at that in a little bit. Now what I also like about the Sustainer, it comes with some additional storage for the TS55 accessories. You can store a couple of the blades in the base here. You can store your track saw extension bars here in this slot. And you can store a couple of clamps here as well. And that pretty much gives you everything that you would typically use the TS55 for on a job site. So you take your rail or rails with you, load up the accessories in the Sustainer, and off you go and do your job. So that's a nice little feature. So the track saw itself comes in both 240 volt and 110 volt mode here in the UK. The one I've got here is the 240 volt one. It comes with a 1200 watt motor, and it will give you a speed between 2000 and 5200 revs per minute. It will give you an angle cut between 0 and 47 degrees, which is quite useful. And it will cut up to 55mm stock at 0 degrees, and it will cut up to 43mm stock when you've got it hard over to the 47 degree inclination. The saw blade is 160mm wide, it's got a 20mm arbor in the centre, and it comes in a variety of teeth configuration that we'll look at shortly. No matter which blade you go for, they are all 2.2mm wide. At the front here we have the depth guide. This controls how deep the blades are going to cut into your material, and this one is calibrated in millimeters. You'll see that there's two gauges, there's one here and there's one here with FS above it. This side here is the depth of cut if the plunge saw is not on a track, and this one here is the depth of cut if the plunge saw is on a track. And you just simply adjust that to the depth you want. A maximum cut of 55mm if it's not on the rail, a maximum cut of 50mm if it is on the rail, and obviously that comes all the way back to 0. You have a gauge here that shows you the angle you're going to be cut at. It's set on 0. There's a black knob here at the front that you undo, and there's a corresponding black knob here at the back that you also undo. And then that allows this to tip left and right. It will always come back to 0, but it has a neat trick where you can actually bring it down to -1 degrees, and you lift this small lever here with -1 on it, and that will then take you to that -1 degrees, which might be useful in some situations, and then you'd lock that down. It stops at 45 degrees, but it does have a feature of going to 47 degrees. On the back here there is a green knob, and you simply pull that knob out, and then that allows this to go all the way over to 47 degrees, and then you can lock that into position and simply tighten the knob at the front and tighten the knob at the back, and then you're good to go. As always with Festool, dust extraction is pretty good and it's built in. This is the attachment, and it will take both the 27mm hose that fits inside and the 36mm hose that obviously fits on the outside. Festool recommend that you use the larger hose to prevent clogging. To be honest, I tend to use the 27mm hose, and I've never really had an issue with it. It's a variable speed, and there's an adjuster knob here behind the handle, and it goes all the way from 1 up to 6, with 6 being 5,200 revs per minute and 1 being 2,000 revs per minute. And obviously you choose the appropriate one for the material that you are cutting. One of the neat features about the Festool is the way that the blade is changed. It's a 5mm Allen key that hides away inside the handle. There's a fast fix lever here that you simply pull forward and engage. That locks the power off so it can't be started and allows it to plunge forward, and it then locks the blade into place and it exposes the arbor. Simply undo the Allen screw, take off the center arbor, hold in the riving knife, and the blade will slot out for you. Goes back in the same way. It's got a couple of locking knobs here on the outside of the plate, and screw that back into place and your blade is changed. Lock that down. Don't need to go super tight, that's good enough. Releasing this will then bring you back to normal, and you can then store your Allen key safely away for next time. And to be honest with you, that's pretty much it. There's not an awful lot goes on with the TS55. Where it really comes into its own, of course, is when we're using it. First thing to note is this side here is very, very flat. And as you can see, the blade is pretty close to this edge. We're only talking about 5 or 6 millimeters from that cutting surface. So if you're trying to take up a floorboard in a house, that's very, very handy. That will run across the skirting board for you, and it will cut very, very close. The other thing here is we have a little plastic window, and this is so you can observe the position of the blade. You can see where your cut is by looking through that plastic window. And if you're doing a plunge cut into the center of a board to cut something out in the center, that's really, really quite good, so you can judge where your blade is up to. This can come out, it just simply slots out, and inside the kit you then get a knob and a green thing. And the green thing is a splinter guard, and that slots back in there. You can pull that down so it's resting on your material, and then you can lock that into position. That then runs across the top of the material, and it stops the wood splintering out that you're working on. Now, where the TS55 really comes into its own is when you use one of these, a track saw, and this is the FS 1400 standing for 1400 millimeters, and these come in a variety of lengths. This one here, for example, is the FS 2700. That's 2700 millimeters long, 2.7, which is ideal for ripping down large panels. Now, you don't have to go and invest in the 2700 millimeter one, because Festool do these things here, and we saw these a few minutes ago, and these will store quite happily in your TS55 box. These are the FSV number 482107, more commonly known as the Festool rail connectors. And these are designed to connect rails together. Very simple design. They simply slide into the track on the rail, one on the top, one on the bottom. Bring the tracks together, slide that into place, and then you can screw that down and it locks the rail. I made the mistake of butting these together, assuming that the size of these rails were 90 degrees. A whole host of people got in touch with me on an earlier video when I said butt those ends together and tighten it down to give yourself a good fit, because those ends are not square on the rail. And Festool, to be fair, don't say that they are. I just assumed that they were. And I've always found that when I try to bring these things together, they're always ever so slightly out of alignment, giving a slight bow in the rails that I connect together, which is why I invested in the long 2700 millimeter rail. The community come back and tell me, don't do that. Festool recommend you leave a slight gap and a straight edge to actually line these things up. So, coming in with a straight edge, not butting these ends up, pulling that hard against the straight edge. I then lock that down using the screws. Turn it over and then lock down the one at the back as well. And then you have your rails connected together. Now on the base of your TS55 you have this groove, and this groove lines on the protrusion here on your rail. Simply slots on, and then that allows your TS55 to slide back into on the rail. And the idea goes that you then line the end of the rail up with what you want to cut, plunge down, and then that will give you that perfect cut every time. And it works incredibly well. Now the first time you use this, you do need to tune in your TS55 with your rails. And on the side of the TS55 there are these two green thumb wheels here. As you turn that thumb wheel, it puts pressure on the center point of these black guides here. And what you want to do is to put your TS55 on your rail, and you're looking to take away any of that sidewards movement on your TS55. And you simply turn these, putting pressure on that black bit until that goes, but you don't want it so tight that you can't move it. So you still want quite a free running TS55, but you want to remove that side to side play. And that's about there. And that's good. Once you've got that done, you can go ahead and you can make your cuts. Now getting accurate cuts with the TS55 is really simple when you use it in conjunction with your track saw. Just make a mark there at my 35 point, slide it under my rail and line it up with this clear plastic strip that's on the end of your rail. Now that clear plastic strip is pretty important. That is actually a splinter guard. It gives you a zero clearance cut between the blade and your board. When you first buy a rail, that splinter guard is somewhat wider. You initiate any new rail that you buy from Festool by putting your TS55 on your rail, adjusting it for sidewards movement using those green knobs we looked at earlier on, and then making a cut right down the length of your rail. The blade then cuts out a thin sliver from that plastic insert, giving you a zero clearance cut. And what you want to do, you take your mark and you line it up to the outside edge of that plastic guard, which in our case is going to be round about there. With this being 18mm board, I want to set my depth stop to 20mm. The reason I want to do that is I do want the blade to cut all the way through the board and cut into the MFT table underneath. And you can see here I've got a number of cutouts in the table already. That's because the table also gives you a zero clearance cut. The plastic one at the top prevents the top of your board chipping out when you're making the cut. The MFT underneath prevents the underside chipping out. The green one here prevents the waste side of your wood chipping out. Undo the thumb screw, rest that onto your board, tighten up the thumb screw. And precision cutting is really that easy. Let's give it a go. Now I'm not sure if you noticed how quickly that stopped. That's because this version is the REBQ, and that means it's got the electronic brake built in. So therefore the electronics slow the blade down quickly when it stops, and that prevents it spinning on and on. Same technology that we saw in the Capex when we reviewed the Capex saw. Good feature. This is my waste piece of wood, and you can see here the waste side is really clean. That's the top of the waste side, and that's the base of the waste side, so not a lot of chipping at all. But the one we're interested in is this cut here, and that's incredibly clean across the front and incredibly clean across the back as well. And all things being equal, we should have a square cut, and we do. Well, that's a TS55. It's a plunge saw from Festool called the TS55 because it can cut 55mm deep. It's a good saw. Now I want to talk to you about saw blades. Festool do 5 blades for the TS55. 3 of them, the yellow ones here, are for wooden materials. There's a blue one here that's for aluminium, and there's a red one that's designed for cutting laminates such as laminate floors and laminated worktops in kitchens. Now, I don't use mine to cut aluminium. I don't like putting metal anywhere near the woodwork projects I'm doing, so I do not use either my Capex or my TS55 for cutting aluminium, so I'm not interested in that blade. I could have done with the red blade when I was doing the conservatory floor, but I didn't have that one. So these are the 3 blades that I tend to have. The difference is in the number of teeth. Let's look at some of these blades. So these are the 3 blades, and you can very clearly see the difference in these blades, and that's to do with the number of teeth that are around the edge of the blade. So you can see this one has got the most teeth, and this is the 48 teeth per inch. That means if you were to unravel all those teeth and lie them down in a straight line, there'd be 48 teeth for every inch of blade. This one here has 28 teeth per inch, and this one here has 12 teeth per inch. And that teeth per inch is very important to us, and that dictates whether the blade is going to be very, very good at rip cutting, where we go with the grain, or the blade is going to be very good at cross cutting, where we go across the grain. Now, when you're cutting across of the grain, your teeth of the blade are almost acting like chisels, and they're shearing the grain as it cuts, and that gives you a very, very fine sawdust, looking something like that, these fine grains here. When you're rip cutting with the blade, the teeth are tending to force the grain apart, so you don't get the same shearing action that you do as you're going across the grain. And you end up with a very different type of shaving, much more like these here, longer in nature. Now, if you have a high count of teeth, such as we've got here in the 48 teeth per inch blade, when you're rip cutting, these tend to get clogged up and they can't be cleared by the blade. They tend to get stuck in your blade like this, and that then tends to push back and resist the blade. So the blade then starts to heat up. As the blade heats up, it scorches the wood and gives you a very uneven cut. And if you saw the video where I was ripping the wood for the drawer front on our bookcase, you'll remember I wasn't happy with the edge. It had burn marks inside there and wasn't a clean edge, and we had to rely on the CMS table in the jointer mode to clean that up for us. That's because I was using this blade, this 48 teeth per inch, and it couldn't physically clear the chips that the blade was making. Therefore it overheated, therefore it stalled, it was fighting me and pushing back, and therefore I got scorch marks on the wood. However, the higher teeth per inch are very, very good in a cross-cutting situation because this is so fine, it just gets flicked out by the blade and collected by the dust collector. So the simple rule of thumb is higher teeth per inch to do you a cross cut, lower teeth per inch to do the rip cut. So what we're going to do, we're just going to make some simple rip cuts across this board using the different blades, and we'll see what we think. Now here's a tip: when you get a new blade, it's going to come coated with oil and gunk, and that's just purely to stop the blade rusting in storage and transit. You want to clean off that oil before you start. If you don't clean off the oil, what will happen is that the shavings will get stuck onto the blade, it will start to clog up, it will get gunk on it, and it will start to overheat and not work so well. It'll just shorten the life of the blade, so it's a good idea to clean this blade off when you first get it. This is a dedicated blade and bit cleaner. To be honest, I bought this because it came in quite a handy bottle. But really, it's just ethanol, the sort of stuff that you'll use to remove nail varnish should you choose to wear that at a weekend. So let's give it a go. Simple squirt. get a rag, and that just wipes and cleans off any of that oil debris. And it's no harder than that, and that blade is now good to go. It's also worthwhile on a weekly basis just going through that same procedure. Make it part of your workshop routine. If you've used a blade, quick coat of ethanol, rub it down, get any gunk out of the edges of the blade, and that will prolong the life of your blade, give you cleaner cuts, and down the line will save you money. So it's well worth doing that every now and then. So we're going to start with the blade that's designed for rip cutting, the 12 teeth per inch. What we'll do one rip cut and then one cross cut with each blade, and then we can compare the difference. So the first thing I will say, that was very easy with the 12 teeth per inch to do that rip cut. I didn't even know I was actually cutting the wood. There was no resistance whatsoever, and the rip cut is really nice. It's not really going to show up on the camera. You can just see the score marks that the blade has made as it's been cutting, so it would need further treatment, either a plane, a sander or a jointer, but in terms of ripping down, that was unbelievable. Now the cross cut hasn't gone very well. You can see it's torn out all the way across here as it's been chewing through that piece of wood. The finish feels pretty smooth, but there's a lot of chip out inside there. So 12 good for rip, 12 not good for cross. Let's look at the 48 by comparison. We'll come back to the 28 in a second. Now in terms of the rip, this really struggled. It was really fighting me, and I could feel the resistance, and although it's not scorched the wood, but it's a very small piece of wood, I could smell the pine burning as I was going through that rip cut. As you'd expect, it's nice and smooth, not beautifully smooth, and I would still suggest that would need some more work before we used it in a final project, but it's a clean cut. The cross is nice and smooth, and there's not much tear out, if any tear out, on the edge of that cut. So 48 good for crossing, not good for ripping. Now the 28 sits somewhere in the middle, and it's the 28 teeth per inch that Festool talk about, or the marketing certainly talks about, as the universal blade, the one that's both good for rip cutting and for cross cutting. Now they claim that the rip cuts are so good on this that they are glue ready, so we don't need to do any more work. The rip cut is incredibly smooth. The edge is absolutely beautiful. So indeed it does seem to have made a really good job of this, and I can actually see that that could well be a glue ready joint. So yeah, the 28 rip is fantastic. In terms of cross, it's beautiful clean line here, and that's the smoothest out of the three. So that would seem to be true. The 28 teeth per inch seems to be the right universal blade. I'm wanting almost joinery ready cuts from my tools, so that's really quite impressive. Now to be fair, my 48 teeth per inch has had a battering, and if you saw the conservatory project earlier on, it's been cutting through laminate floorboards, through MDF, through skirting boards, through all sorts of things, and I think that blade is now probably past its best. But even then, it really struggled on the rip cuts, and you saw the problems I had on the bookcase. So yeah, 48 teeth per inch, I will buy a new blade, and I will use it exclusively for very fine cross cuts. It will not be doing rip cuts anymore for me. But I want to give this 28 teeth per inch one a challenge, because that really is a beautiful smooth cut. Let's take that same pine board, we'll do a couple of rip cuts across it, and then we'll see if we can join the board together to see it really is glue ready, as Festool's marketing will claim. So we'll take another scrap of wood that's going to have a longer rip inside it, and we will cut one rip there, so that will be the protected edge, the edge underneath of the rail, and then we'll cut that off to say there, and then we'll make another rip cut here, with that being the protected edge, and we'll cut it off there. So this will be waste, this will be waste, and this will be waste, and then we'll see whether we can join these two edges together. Let's give that a go. So here's my protected cut. If Festool are right, that should come together with a seamless glue joint, and look at that. That is pretty fine. Can you see the join? Yeah, I can see a little bit by my thumb here. I can see a little bit here at this end, but that's not too bad. Not too bad at all. And that blade just ripped through that beautifully. It really was like a hot knife through butter. So yeah, I'm happy. So I think the universal blade would be the one I would go for. Sadly, it doesn't come with the TS55. You get the 48 teeth per inch, which is great for the cross cuts, but as we've discovered, is not very good on the rip cuts, which is a shame. I think it cost me about 40 UK pounds for the 28 teeth per inch, and if I was to go and buy the larger one, the one that comes with the blade, it's nearly £100. So it's a great opportunity for dropping the price of the TS55 by about 50 UK pound and giving you a blade that's arguably a better compromise for both rips and cross cuts. Go figure. That's it. I hope you found this useful. Thanks for watching. See you next time.